It's June 24th, and this is the morning edition of Mike and Bike. This is the kind of morning I love. Nice and cool, but not freezing. Nice overcast there. Gotta love it. Pink flamingos in a lawn, that's funny. Here we go. So today, the topic of discussion this morning is going to be apostasy. And what does it mean? So, to commit apostasy is to denounce something, or to, I don't know, it's so much denouncing, but to become a heretic. So a heretic is an apostate, I believe, by definition. So a heretic is not going along with orthodox views, for sure, of whatever it is the subject is that they are involved with or being heretical about. Now, I'm not sure, I'll have to look this up, but I wonder if being an apostate and committing apostasy is really a matter for the authorities to determine. So if you are excommunicated from a church, you have committed apostasy. But if you're not excommunicated, maybe you're not an apostate. So maybe it's a nebulous thing that the individual themselves can't determine. It's up to the organizations or communities to which they belong and have ownership over a set of beliefs that are the arbiters of apostasy. And the reason I wanted to discuss this today, apostasy today, is because of the recent announcement in the news of a woman in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or the Mormon Church. I think her name is Kate Kelly, who was recently excommunicated from the faith by leaders in her church for her heretical views. And namely, that she believes that women ought to be able to be ordained to the priesthood in the Mormon Church. It's obviously not a new subject. Other churches have certainly had controversies in this area themselves. The Catholic Church, Church of England, lots of churches. Many of them have eventually allowed women into into the ranks of priesthood. Mormons have not. But it is interesting that the Mormon Church has excommunicated somebody for advocating this. Now, this of course has a certain amount of interest for me, being having been someone who came from the Mormon Church myself, being raised in it. I think it's interesting that I think the main reason many intellectuals, I think the top reason that intellectuals are excommunicated from the Mormon Church, these official excommunications, are because of their public stance. So if you if you get a lot of media attention or are well known on the internet or something like that for a position that runs counter to what the leadership of the church or even church doctrine teaches, that in this case that's what riles the leadership and will lead to excommunication. Holding heretical views to yourself likely won't they're not going to get that upset about it. It's when you go out publicly that really gets their ire. And the Mormon church is a little tricky. It's a little different than many churches because they believe that they have an actual prophet of God, that the leader of their church is a prophet who receives revelation from God. In other words, the pronouncements of the prophet are the word of God. Therefore, to disagree with your prophet is to disagree with the word of God, which is pretty weighty. I think many other churches, Presbyterian or Lutheran, don't have that kind of a belief system. They're run by committees with no claim to divine guidance. Which leads to a couple questions that I have for people like Kate Kelly. If you believe in your religion, you believe in the Mormon theology, and you believe that the prophet really is working under divine guidance, then why would you ever want to argue with him? Or argue with the church leaders then and say that you disagree with the policy on women ordinations in the priesthood and so on? Because to disagree with your prophet is tantamount to saying you don't agree with God. I don't know. That would seem a step too far to me if I was the believing type. So that's the first thing I don't quite understand. I mean, of course, I don't believe in the Mormon theology anyway, so I certainly don't see any reason why women can't be ordained to the priesthood in the Mormon church. But that's kind of beside the point. So, in short, what I'm saying is, if the activists calling for the ordination of women in the Mormon church got their wish, wouldn't that somehow kind of undermine the foundation of the church anyway? Or the belief in its, undermine its theological basis? I don't know. Now, one could argue that the Mormon church changed its mind regarding the ordination of black men to the priesthood, from which Mormon or black men were prohibited until 1978, when the then prophet Spencer W. Kimball received revelation that God believed it was time for blacks to be able to receive the priesthood. Black men, mind you. However, conveniently, there was a significant amount of wiggle room around black ordinations. Mormon leaders had maintained that God had simply said that it wasn't time yet for the blacks to receive the priesthood. So they hadn't said that this was like some pronouncement from God for all time and eternity. And the fact that they'd been saying that this was a temporary state of affairs gave them enough wiggle room to be able to rescind their prohibition. But such is not the case on the prohibition of female ordinations in the Mormon Church. The church has been pretty vocal for a long time about the place of women in its church, which is basically no positions of authority, and certainly not in the priesthood. So I don't know how there'd be an easy face-saving way out of it for the Mormon leaders to change their position on things, or on this anyway. I think it is worth noting that the Mormon Church has been vague on a number of issues that leaves plenty of wiggle room for the church to change its stance eventually. Contraception, for example, is one of those. The Mormon Church doesn't have a policy prohibiting contraception. Instead, they kind of encourage people not to use it. They will have comments to the effect of, well, we have joy through families and children, and so why would you want to limit your joy of life by not having children, or as many children as you can? Which is not ever saying don't use contraception, but it's certainly giving letting the members know the preference for fertility. I think abortion would be something, it would be another subject that would be hard for the LDS Church to ever change positions on. They've been very categorical on that. So too with homosexuality and accepting openly gay members. That too, I think, would be very difficult for the church to backtrack on. So back to apostasy, I'm trying to think, like, why do organizations or churches excommunicate members and declare them to be apostate? What good does it do? I mean, God ultimately is the one who determines if we're, according to their belief system, salvation will be determined by God and our own inner faith. I mean, excommunication is an act of man. It's not an act of God. And what does it accomplish to cast someone out from their church. I mean, it seems kind of petty in a way. Okay, so on a whole bunch of levels, for the apostate themselves, I don't think the apostates need to worry about their salvation, assuming again that they are believers. Because if they are believers, then they won't really care what mortal men decide in regards to church memberships or whatever. In fact, church membership in a given organization doesn't mean diddly. So, when it comes to eternal salvation, that would be, again, the purview of God alone. So I think apostates don't need to worry about their being condemned to hell because of some slip of paper or decree that states they're no longer a member of a given church. So all they need to do is feel comfortable in their hearts with their beliefs. Now, from the standpoint of the church, I mean, to excommunicate somebody, in many senses, gives them a bigger voice. I mean, the worst thing, the Catholic Church made a much bigger deal out of Galileo by excommunicating him than they ever would have by doing nothing. They didn't have to accept his beliefs or anything. But why go to the extent of actually excommunicating the guy? I don't know. It just seems very counterproductive. I mean, the only thing I can think of is that excommunication is a tool of control by leaders of organizations who want to keep the members in line and want the members to toe the line. And if they're not following your orders, well, you excommunicate them. What's absurd, though, is that many churches, and certainly the Mormon Church, are more likely to excommunicate an intellectual who questions doctrine in their religion than a sinner who goes and murders somebody or commits some terrible act of crime, which of course is violating the teachings of their religion. So why is it then that criminals can still be embraced by a church, but an intellectual who's committed no crime, has not murdered anybody, has not committed any grievous harm to any person, is excommunicated simply because they question the doctrine of their faith? It's fascinating how that is a more egregious offense than to go out and murder somebody. Again, I think it comes down to control. Someone who is questioning church doctrine and certainly doing it publicly and getting attention could pose the threat of upending the power and authority of those who control that church or organization. And in the end, I think that's where the real fear is, and that's why Kate Kelly was excommunicated. And there's no other reason. It's not because she committed some great sin. I guess sin, I suppose, sin in the sense of heresy. Let's not forget that Christians hold Jesus as being the penultimate heretic. Christian tradition holds that Jesus challenged the religions of his day and was killed for it, for his heresy. He's challenged to the religious leadership. Was he committing a sin to blaspheme? But of course, Jesus was the Son of God. So it's okay if you're the Son of God, but not anybody else. Well, in this day and age, though, I really think the Mormon leaders have erred here in excommunicating Mrs. Kelly, even just from a pragmatic standpoint, nothing to do with theology or whether they have the right to, should have the right to excommunicate people or whatnot. If the whole purpose of excommunication is to somehow take the wind from the sails of heretics, to try to cast them out into darkness so they can't have as much of an impact on corrupting the minds of the members of their church, then what they've done to Kate Kelly, will have the opposite effect. Kate is now getting lots of attention precisely because of her excommunication, which raises her cause of female ordination to a much higher level and much wider publicity level than it ever had before. And that ends another episode of Mike and Bike. See you all next time.